Hi, good morning. It's Miss Chabot. I'm here to read chapter 2 of The City of Ember. Sorry I missed yesterday. So I will begin a message to the mayor, chapter 2, and I've got my little puppies here with me, so they might make a little appearance from time to time. Lena often took different routes between school and home, sometimes just for variety. She'd go all the way around Sparks Swallow Square or up by the shoe repair shops on Lavier Street. But today she took the shortest route because she was eager to get home and tell her news. She ran fast and easily through the streets of Ember. Every corner, every alley, every building was familiar to her. She always knew where she was, though most streets looked more or less the same. All of them were lined with old two-story stone buildings. The wood of their window frames and doors, long unpainted, on the street level were shops. Above the shops were the apartments where people lived. Every shop, every building at the place where the wall met the roof was equipped with a roof of floodlights, big cone-shaped lamps that cast the stone yellow glare. Stone walls, lighted windows, lumpy, muffled shapes of people. Lena flew by them. Her slender legs felt immensely strong, like the wood of the bow that flexes and springs. She darted around obstacles, broken furniture left for the trash heaps or for scavengers, stoves, and refrigerators that were past repair peddlers sitting on the pavement with their wares spread out around them. She leapt over cracks and potholes. When she came to Harf Street, she slowed a little. This street was deep in the shadow. Four of its street lamps were out and had not been fixed. For a second, Lena thought of the rumor she'd heard about. You see my puppies? They're jumping all over me. Let me see. Four of its street lamps were out and had not been fixed. For a second, Lena thought of the rumor she'd heard about the light bulbs, that some kinds were completely gone. She was used to shortages of things everyone was, but not of light bulbs. If the bulbs for the for the street lamps ran out, the only lights would be inside the buildings. That what would happen then? How could people find their way through the streets in the dark? Somewhere inside her, a black worm of dread stirred. She thought about Dune's outburst in class. Could things really be as bad as he said? She didn't want to believe it. She pushed through. She pushed the thought away. As she turned onto Budlow Street, she sped up again. She passed a line of customers waiting to get into the vegetable market, their shopping bags draped over their arms at the corner of Oliver Street. She dodged a group of washers trudging along with bags of laundry, some movers carrying away broken tables. She passed the street sweeper shoving dust around with his broom. I'm so lucky, she thought, to have the job I want, and because of Dune Harrow, of all people. When they were younger, Lena and June had been friends. Together, they had explored the back alleys and dimly lit edges of the city. But in their fourth year of school, they had begun to grow apart. It started one day during the hour of free time when the children in the class were playing on the front steps of the school. I can go down 3 steps at a time, someone would boast. I can hop down on one foot, someone else would say. The others would chime in. I can do a handstand against the pillar, and I can leapfrog over the trash can. As soon as one child did something, all the rest would do it too to prove they could. You see my little puppy? Lena could do it all. Even when the dares got wilder, she yelled out the wildest of all, I can climb the light pole. For a second, everyone just stared at her. But Lena dashed across the street. She took off her shoes and socks and wrapped herself around the cold metal of the pole, pushing with her bare feet. She inched upward. She didn't get very far before she lost her grip and fell back down. The children laughed, and so did she. I didn't say I'd climb to the top, she explained. I just said I'd climb it. The others swarmed forward to try. Lizzie wouldn't take off her shoes. Her feet were too cold, she said. So she kept sliding back. Forward, 40 Penny wasn't strong enough to get more than a foot off the ground. Next came June. He took his shoes and socks off and placed them neatly at the foot of the pole. Then he announced in a serious way, I'm going to the top. He clasped the pole and started upward, pushing with his feet, his knees sticking out to the sides. He pulled himself upward, pushed again, and was higher now than Lena had ever been. But suddenly his hands began to slide, and he came plummeting down. He landed on his bottom with his legs poking up in the air. Lena laughed. She shouldn't have. He might have been hurt, but he looked so funny that she couldn't help it. He wasn't hurt. He could have jumped up, grinned, and walked away, but June didn't take things lightly. When he heard Lena and the others laughing, his face darkened. His temper rose in him like a hot water. Don't you dare laugh at me, he said to Lena. I did better than you did. That was a stupid idea anyway. A stupid, stupid idea to climb up that pole. And as he was shouting, red in the face, their teacher, Mrs. Palster, came out onto the steps and saw him. She took him by the shirt collar to the school's director's office, where he got a scolding he didn't think he deserved. After that day, Lena and June barely looked at each other when they passed in the hall. At first, it was because they were fuming about what had happened. June didn't like being laughed at. Lena didn't like being shouted at. After a while, the memory of the light pole incident faded, but by then they had got out of the habit of their friendship. By the time they were 12, they knew each other only as classmates. Lena was friends with Vindy Chansey, Orly Gordon, and most of all, the red haired Lizzie Biscoe, who could run almost as fast as Lena and could talk 3 times faster. Now, as Lena sped toward home, she felt immensely grateful to June and hoped he'd come to no harm in the pipeworks. Maybe they'd be friends again. She'd like to ask him about the pipeworks. She was curious about it. When she got to the Greystone Street, she passed Clary Lane, who was probably on her way to the greenhouse. Clary waved her and called out, What job?" And Lena called back, "Messenger," and she ran on. Lena lived on Corlum Street, over the yarn shop run by her grandmother. When she got there to the shop, she burst in the door and cried, "Granny, I'm the messenger." Granny's shop had once been a tidy place where each ball of yarn and spool of thread had its spot in the cubby holes that lined the walls. All the yarn and thread came from the old clothes that had gotten too shabby to be worn. Granny unraveled sweaters and picked apart dresses and jackets and pants. She wound the yarn into balls. I know. Sorry. Oh, goodness. She wound the yarn into balls and thread into spools, and people brought them in making new clothes. These days, the shop was a mess. Long loops and strands of yarn dangling out the cubby holes, and the browns and grays and purples were mixed in with the orchards and olive greens and dark blues. Granny's customers often had to spend half an hour unsnarling the rust red yarn from the mud brown or trying to fish out the end of the thread from tangled wad. Granny wasn't much help. Most days, she just dozed behind the counter of her rocking chair. That's where she was when Lena burst in with her news. Lena saw that Granny had forgotten to knot up her hair that morning. It was standing out from her head in a wild white frizz. Granny stood up and looked puzzled. You aren't a messenger, dear. You're a schoolgirl," she said. "But Granny, today was assignment day. I got my job and I am a messenger." Granny's eyes lit up and she slapped her hand down on the counter. "I remember," she cried. "Messenger, that's a grand job. You'll be good at it." Lena's little sister toddled out from behind the counter on unsteady legs. She had a round face and brown eyes. At the top of her head was a sprig of brown hair tied up with a scrap of red yarn. She grabbed onto Lena's knees. Wana, Wana, she said. Lena bent down and took the child's hand. Poppy, your big sister got a good job. Are you happy, Poppy? Are you proud of me? Poppy said something that sounded like hoppy, hoppy, hoppy. Lena laughed, hoisted her up, and danced her around the shop. If you see this, he's on my back. Lena loved her little sister so much that it was like an ache under her ribs. The baby and Granny were all the family she had now. 2 years ago, when the coughing sickness was raging through the city again, her father had died. Some months later, her mother had given birth to Poppy, and she died too. Lena missed her parents with an ache that was so strong that she felt for Poppy, only it was a hollow feeling inside of her full one. When do you start? Asked Granny. Tomorrow, said Lena. I report to the messenger's station at 8 o'clock. You'll be a famous messenger. I report to the You'll be a famous messenger, said Granny. Fast and famous. Taking Poppy with her, Lena went out of the shop and climbed the steps to the apartment. It was a small apartment, only 4 rooms, but there was enough stuff in it to fill 20. There were things that had belonged to Lena's parents, her grandparents, and even their grandparents. Old, broken, cracked, thoroughbred things that had been patched and repaired dozens of hundreds of times. People in the Ember rarely threw things away. They made the best possible use of what they had. In Lena's apartment, layers of worn rugs and carpets covered the floor, making it soft but uneven underfoot. Against one wall squatted a sagging couch with round wooden balls for legs, and on the couch were blankets and pillows, so many that you had to toss some on the floor before you could sit down. Against the opposite wall stood two wobbly tables that held clutter of plates and bottles, cups and bowls, unmatched forks and spoons, little piles of scrap paper, bits of string wound up in untidy bit of wads, and a few stubby pencils. There were 4 lamps, 2 tall ones that stood on the floor and 2 short ones that stood on tables. And in an uneven lines up near the ceilings were hooks that held the coats and shawls and nightgowns and sweaters, shelves that held pots and pans with jars and unreadable labels, and boxes of buttons and pins and tacks. Where there were no shelves, the walls had been decorated with things of beauty. A label from a can of peaches, a few dried yellow squash flowers, a strip of faded but still pretty purple cloth. There were drawings too. Lena had done the drawings out of her imagination. They showed a city that looked something somewhat like Ember, except that its buildings were lighter and taller and had more windows. One of the drawings had fallen to the floor. Lena retrieved it and pinned it back up. She stood for a minute and looked at the pictures over and over. She'd drawn the same city. Sometimes she drew it as she'd seen from afar. Sometimes she chose one of its buildings and drew it in detail. She put it in the stairway and street lamps and carts. Sometimes she tried to draw the people who lived in the city, though she wasn't good at drawing people. Their heads always came out too small and their hands looked like spiders. One picture showed a scene in which people of the city greeted her when she arrived. The first person had the first person they'd ever had seen to come from elsewhere. They argued with each other about who should be the first to invite her home. Lena could see this city so clearly in her mind, she almost believed that it was real. She knew it couldn't be, though. The book of the City of Ember, which all children studied in school, thought otherwise. The City of Ember was made for us long ago by the builders, the book said. It is the only light in a dark world. Beyond Ember, the darkness goes on forever in all directions. Lena had been to the outer border of Ember. She stood at the edge of the trash heaps and gazed into the darkness beyond the city, the unknown regions. No one had ever gone far into the unknown regions, or at least no one had gone far and returned. And no one had ever arrived in Ember from the unknown regions either, as far as anyone knew. The darkness did go on forever still. Lena wanted the other cities to exist in her imagination. It was so beautiful. It seemed so real. Sometimes she longed to go there and take everyone in Ember with her. But she wasn't thinking about the other cities now. Today, she was happy to be right where she was. She set Poppy on the couch. Wait there, she said. She went into the kitchen where there was an electric stove and a refrigerator that no longer worked and was used to the store glasses and dishes so Poppy couldn't get at them. Above the refrigerator were shelves holding more pots and jars, more spoons and knives, and a wind up clock that Granny always forgot to wind up, and a long row of cans. Lena tried to keep the cans in alphabetical order so she could always find what she wanted quickly, but Granny always messed them up. Now she saw there were beans at the end of the row and tomatoes at the beginning. She picked out a can labeled baby drink and a jar of boiled carrots, opened them, poured the liquid into the cup and the carrots into the little dish, and took these back to the baby on the couch. Poppy dribbled baby drink down her chin. She ate some of the carrots and poked others between the couch cushions. For a moment, Lena felt almost perfectly happy. There was no need to think about the fate of the city right now. Tomorrow, got a little friend walking by. There was no need to think about the fate of the city right now. Tomorrow, she said she'd be a messenger. She wiped the orange goop off Poppy's chin. Don't worry, she said. Everything will be all right. I got dogs everywhere. The messenger's headquarters was on Clothing Street, not far from the back of the gathering hall. When Lena arrived the next morning, she was greeted by the messenger captain, Alice Fleary, a bony woman with pale eyes and her hair the color of dust. Our new girl, the captain said Captain Fleary to the other messengers, a cluster of 9 people who smiled and nodded at Lena. I have your jacket right here, said the captain. She handed Lena a red jacket like the one all messengers wore. It was only a little too large. From the clock tower of the gathering hall came the deep reverberating bong. 8 o'clock, cried Captain Fleary. She waved a long arm. Take your stations. As the clock sounded 7 more times, the messengers scattered in all directions. The captain turned to Lena. Your station, she said, is Grand Square. Lena nodded and started off, but the captain caught her by the collar. I haven't told you the rules, she said. She held up a knobby finger. 1. When a customer gives you a message, repeat it back to them to make sure you have it right. 2. Always wear your red jacket so people can identify you. 3. Go as fast as possible. Your customers pay 20 cents for every message, no matter how far you take it. Lena nodded. I always go fast, she said. 4, said the captain. The, deliver a message only to the person it's meant to be, for no one else. Lena nodded again and bounced her on her little toes, eager to get going. Captain Fleary smiled. Go, she said, and Lena was off. She felt strong and speedy and sure footed. She glanced at her reflection as she ran past the window of the furniture repair shop. She liked the look of her long, dark hair flying out behind her, her long legs in the black socks, and her flapping red jacket. Her face, which had never seemed especially remarkable, looked almost beautiful because she looked so happy. As soon as she came into Grand Square, a voice cried, Messenger! Her first customer. It was old Natty Prine calling to her from the bench where he always sat. This goes to Reverend Parsons, 18 Civilton Square, he said. Bend down. She bent down so that her ear was close to him. close to his whiskery mouth. The old man said in a slow, hoarse voice, "My stove is broke. Don't come for dinner. Repeat." Lena repeated the message. "Good," said Natty Prine. He gave Lena 20 cents and she ran across the city to Silverton Square, where she found Reverend Parsons also sitting on a bench. She recited the message to him. "Old turnip head," he growled. "Lazy old flea face. He just doesn't like he just doesn't feel like cooking." No reply. Lena ran back to Grand Square, passing a group of believers on the way. They were standing in a circle, holding hands, singing one of their cheerful songs. It seemed to Lena there were more believers than ever these days. What they believed in, she didn't know, but it must have made them happy that they were always smiling. Her next customer turned out to be Mrs. Polster, the teacher of her fourth year class. Mrs. Polster's class, they memorized passages from the book of the City of Ember every week. Mrs. Polster had charts on the walls for everything, with everyone's name listed. If you did something right, she made a green dot by your name. If you did something wrong, she made a red dot. When you need what you need to learn, children, she always said in her resonant, precise voice, is the difference between right and wrong in every area of life. And once you learn the difference, here she would stop and point to the class, and the class would finish the sentence. You must always choose the right. In every situation, Miss Polster knew what the right choice was. Now here was Miss Polster again, looming over Lena and pronouncing her message. To Anisette Lenford, 39 Hum Street, as follows, she said, "My confidence in you has been seriously diminished since I heard about the disreputable activities in which you engaged on Thursday last. Please repeat." It took Lena three tries to get it right. Uh-oh. "A red dot for me," she said. Miss Polster did not seem to find this amusing. Lena had 19 customers that first morning. Some of them had ordinary messages. "I can't come on Tuesday." "Buy a pound of potatoes on your way home." "Please come and fix my front door." Others had messages that made no sense to her at all, like Miss Polster's. But it didn't matter. The wonderful part about being a messenger was not the messages, but the places that she got to go. She could go into the houses of people she didn't know and hidden alleyways and little rooms in the backs of stores. In just a few short hours, she discovered all kinds of strange and interesting things. For instance, Miss Sample, the mender, had to sleep on her couch because her entire bedroom was almost up to the ceiling, was crammed with clothes to be mended. Dr. Felina Tower had a skeleton of a person hanging against her living room wall, its bones all held in place with black strings. "I study it," she said when she saw Lena staring. I have to know how people are put together." At the house of Carlo Street, Lena delivered a message to a worried looking man whose living room was completely dark. "I'm saving on light bulbs," the man said. And when Lena took a message to Can Cafe, she learned that on certain days, the back room was used for a meeting place for people who'd like to converse about great subjects. "Do you think an invisible being is watching over us all the time?" she heard someone say. "Perhaps," answered another. Was a long silence, and then again, "Perhaps not." All of it was very interesting. She loved finding things out and she loved running. And even by the end of the day, she wasn't tired. Running made her feel strong and big hearted. It made her love the places that she ran through and the people whose messages she delivered. She wished she could bring all of them the good news they so desperately wanted to hear. Late in the afternoon, a young man came up to her, walking with a sort of sideways lurch. He was an odd looking person. He had a very long neck, with a bump in the middle and his teeth so big they looked as if they were trying to escape from his mouth. His black bushy hair stuck out from his head in untidy tufts. "I have a message for the mayor at the gathering hall," he said. He paused to let an importance of this be understood. "The mayor," he said. "Did you get that?" "I got it," said Lena. "All right, listen carefully. Tell him. Delivery at 8 from Looper. Repeat it back." "Delivery at 8 from Looper," Lena repeated. It was an easy message. "All right, no answer required." He handed her 20 cents and she sprinted away. The gathering hall occupied one entire side of Harkin Square, which was the city's central plaza. The square was paved with stone. It had a few benches bolted to the ground and here and there, as well as a couple of kiosks for notices. Wide steps led up to the gathering hall, and fat columns framed its big door. The mayor's office was in the gathering hall. So were the offices of the clerks who kept track of which buildings had broken windows and street lamps needed repair, and the number of people in the city. There was the office of the timekeeper who was in charge of the town clock, and there were offices for the guards who enforced the laws of Ember, now and then putting pickpockets or people who got into fights into prison room. A small one-story structure with a sloping roof that jutted out from the side of the building. Lena ran up the steps and through the door into the broad hallway. On the left was a desk, and at the desk sat a guard. "Barton Snood, assistant guard," said the badge on his chest. He was a big man with wide shoulders, brawny arms, and a thick neck, but his head looked as if it didn't belong to his body. It was small and round and topped with fuzz of extremely short hair. His lower jaw jutted out and moved a little from side to side as if he were chewing on something. When Lena saw his jaw stop moving for a moment and his lips curled upward in a very small smile, "Good day," he said. "What business brings you here today?" "I have a message for the mayor." "Very, very good, very good." Barton Snood heaved himself to his feet. "Step this way." He led Lena down the corridor and opened the door marked reception room. "Wait here, please," he said. "The mayor is in a basement office on private business, but he will be up shortly." Lena went inside. "I'll notify the mayor," said Barton Snood. "Please have a seat. The mayor will be right with you, or pretty soon." He left, closing the door behind him. A second later, the door opened again and the guard's small, fuzzy head reappeared. "What's the message?" he said. "I have to give it to the mayor in person," said Lena. Of course," said the guard. The door closed behind him. "He doesn't seem very sure about things." Lena thought maybe he's new at his job. The reception room was shabby, but Lena could tell it had once been very impressive. The walls were dark red with a brownish patches where the paint was peeling away. In the right-hand wall was a closed door with an ugly brown carpet that lay on the floor, and on it stood a large armchair covered in itchy red-looking material with several smaller chairs. A small table held a teapot and some cups, and a larger table in the middle of the room displayed a copy of the Book of the City of Ember, lying open as if it were going to read from it. Portraits of all of the mayors of the city since the beginning of time hung on the walls, staring solemnly from behind pieces of old window glass. Lena sat at the big armchair and waited. No one came. She got up and wandered around the room. She bent over the Book of the City of Ember and read a few sentences. The citizens of Ember may not have luxuries, but in foresight of the builders who filled the storerooms at the beginning of time has ensured that there will always have enough, and enough is all that the person of wisdom needs. She flipped a few pages. "The gathering hall clock," she read, "measures the hours of night and day. It must never be allowed to run down. Without it, how would we know when to go to work and when to go to school? How would the light director know when to turn the lights on and to turn off them off again? It is the job of the timekeeper to wind the clock every week and to place the date sign in Harkin Square every day. The timekeeper must perform these duties faithfully. Lena knew that not all timekeepers were as faithful as they should be. She'd heard of one some years ago who'd forgotten to change the date sign so that it might say Wednesday, week 38, year 227 for several days in a row. There had even been a timekeeper who'd forgot to wind the clock so that it might stand at noon or at midnight for hours at a time, causing a very, very long day or very long night. In result, there was no one really the result was that no one really knew any more exactly what day of the week it was or exactly how many years it had been since the building of the city. They called this the year 241, but it might have been 245 or 239 or 250. As long as the clock's deep boom rang out every hour and the lights went on and off more or less regularly, it didn't seem to matter. Lena left the book and examined the pictures of the mayors. The seventh mayor, Pod Morthwart, was the great was her great she didn't know how many greats grandfather. He looked quite dreary, Lena thought. His cheeks were long and hollow, his mouth turned down at the corners, and there was a lost look in his eyes. The picture she liked best was the fourth mayor, Jane Lockhart, who had a sincere smile and fuzzy black hair. Still, no one came. She heard no sounds from the hallway. Maybe they'd forgotten about her. Lena went over to the closed door in the right hand wall. She pulled it open and saw stairs going up. Maybe, well, while she waited, she just waits to see where they went. She started upward. At the top of the first flight was a closed door. Carefully, she opened it. She saw another hallway and more closed doors. She shut the door and she kept going. Her footsteps sounded loud on the wood, and she was afraid someone would hear her and would come and scold her. No doubt she was not supposed to be here, but no one came, and she climbed on, passing another closed door. The gathering hall was the only building in Ember with 3 stories. She had always wanted to stand on its roof and look out of the city. Maybe from there it would be possible to see beyond the city into the unknown regions. If the bright city of her drawings really did exist, it would be out there somewhere. At the top of the stairs, she came to a door marked roof. She pushed it open. Chilly air brushed against her skin. She went outside. Ahead of her was a flat gravel surface. About 10 paces away, she could see the high wall of the clock tower. She went to the edge of the roof. From there, she could see the whole Emperor. Directly below her was Harkin Square, where people were moving this way and that, all of them appearing from this top-down view, more round than tall. Beyond Harkin Square, the lighted windows of the buildings and checkered lines, yellow and black, row after row in all directions. She tried to see farther across the unknown regions, but she couldn't. At the edges of the city, the lights were so far away that they had made a kind of haze. She could see nothing beyond them out but blackness. She heard a shout from the square below. Look! Came a small but piercing voice. Someone's on the roof. She saw a few people stop and look up. Who is it? What is she doing up there? Someone cried. More people began to gather until a crowd was standing on the steps of the gathering hall. They see me, Lena thought, and it made her laugh. She waved at the crowd and did a few steps from the Bugfoot scurry dance, which she'd learned on Cloving Square Dance Day, and they laughed and shouted some more. Then the door behind her burst open, and a huge guard with bushy black hair bushy black beard was suddenly running toward her. "Halt!" he shouted, though she wasn't going anywhere. He grabbed her arm. "What are you doing here?" "I was just curious," said Lena in her most innocent voice. "I wanted to see the city from the roof." She reared the guard's name badge, and it said Reddick's Stambark, Chief Guard. "Curiosity leads to trouble," said Redditch Stabmark. He peered down at the crowd. "You have caused a commotion." He pulled her toward the door and hoisted her down all 3 flights of stairs. When they came out into the waiting room, Barton Snood was standing there looking flustered with his jaw twitching from side to side. Next to him was the mayor. "A child causing trouble," Mayor Cole said, the chief guard. The mayor glared at her. "I recall your face from assignment day. Shame. Disgracing yourself in a new job." "I didn't mean to cause any trouble," said Lena. I was I was looking for you so I could deliver a message." "Shall we put her in the prison room for a day or two?" asked the chief guard. The mayor frowned and pondered a moment. "What is the message?" he said. He bent down so that Lena could speak into his ear. She noticed that he smelled a little like overcooked turnips. "Delivery at 8, Lena whispered, "from Looper." The mayor smiled, a tight little smile. She turned to the guard. "Just a child's antics," he said. "We will let it go this time for now," he said to Lena. "Behave yourself." "Yes, Mr. Mayor," said Lena. "And you," said the mayor, turning to the assistant guard and shaking a thick finger at him, "watch visitors much, much more carefully." Barton Snood blinked and nodded. Lena ran out the door. Outside, the small crowd was still standing by the steps. A few of them cheered as Lena came out. Others frowned at her and muttered words like mischief and silliness and show off. Lena felt embarrassed. Suddenly, she hadn't meant to show off. She hurried past out into Outer Will Street and started to run. She didn't see June, who was among those watching her. He had been on his way home from the first day of the pipe works when he'd come across the cluster of people gathering at the roof of the gathering hall and laughing. He was tired and chilly. The bottom of his pant legs were wet, and mud clung to his shoes and smeared his hands. When he raised his eyes and he saw a small figure next to the clock tower, he realized right away that it was Lena. He saw her raise her arms and wave and hop about for a second. He wondered what it would be like to be up there, looking out over the whole city, laughing and waving. When Lena came down, he wanted to speak to her, but he knew he was filthy looking and that she would ask him questions he didn't want to answer. So he turned away, walking fast, and he headed for home. So that's the end of chapter 2. A message for the mayor. She delivered the message. There's a delivery at 8 o'clock from Looper. We will find out later on. Chapter 3, Under Ember. I will read that. I'll come back on in a little while. I'm feeling the best, so I'm going to take a little break, get some orange juice, take some medicine, and I will come back on and read you chapter 3 of The City of Ember. I hope you guys are enjoying your break. I don't know how to stop this. End stream. There it is. Doo-doo.